The Shaman's Gift by J.W. Steele. It was a steep and merciless climb. With every wretched breath, the air burned in his lungs. Several times he had stumbled on loose boulders, and crashed hard on the petrified slope. A streak of rust-colored blood seeped through the knee of his dungarees. The joint, now stiff, pressed tight against the fabric of his pant leg. The man stopped and raised the visor of his bill cap. He cursed the rocks and wiped the sweat from his brow with his sleeve. When his breathing steadied, he glared up at the sky. "Probably just another worthless heretic," he muttered. The undying voice deep in his mind whispered, "They're all programmed, every one of them is the same." He gripped his walking stick tightly, braced it against his leg, and strode toward the summit. Near the ridge, a narrow plateau appeared, void of growth save for blueberry bushes bursting with fruit as big as walnuts. The Indian wasn't lying, he thought. He rested a moment, wheezing softly on the summit. The old man's words had brought him here, and he marveled at their effect on him. A few hours ago, the young man had a vision, a purpose, and now he stood lost and bleeding in the middle of nowhere. He gazed out into the desert and contemplated the events that had led him to this moment. He was heading somewhere out west, near the ocean. Maybe he could find a better life there. Deep in the heart of the Superstition Mountains, he had encountered a filling station composed entirely of petrified boulders, and he stopped to refuel. An old Indian sat cross-legged on the wooden steps that led to the government store. Another destitute outcast waiting to die, the young man thought. He reached into his pocket and retrieved a few crumpled bills. He crushed them into a wad and thrust them toward the old man. "Here you go, Geronimo," he said. The Indian remained still, his neck bent, and his face hidden beneath the broad rim of his weathered felt hat. A spade-headed serpent appeared from beneath the steps. It slithered over the old man's tattered boots like some kind of guardian. The Indian hummed softly as the snake slipped back into the darkened portal. The old Indian looked like something out of a death camp. His red-brown face was gaunt and creased with furrows, like an alien fossil from the Pleistocene. One of his eyes held a gray cataract. "I don't need your money, pilgrim. I have many riches," the old man said. The stranger's eyes narrowed. "Looks like you sleep in the desert to me. Here, take this, buy a pint of firewater. It's the only mercy there is in this place." A toothless grin formed on the old man's face. He laughed like some kind of barfly bequeathed a free glass of gin. "What Yankee like you want out here? We evil, we breed demons, we know wear underpants, we have lice. You have much to lose." The stranger looked into the Indian's eyes. He sensed a cold, eternal serenity, like some kind of mystic that would never again know rebirth in a world such as this. The Indian's eyes gripped him in a trance, and an epiphany flashed in his skull. "This guy's not alive, and he's not dead. I've got nothing to lose I haven't already lost, old-timer. Besides, it's nothing you'd understand anyway." The Indian raised one hand and placed it over his crippled eye. "Us, Kiowa understands a whole heap. You poor, very poor. Why live poverty with so many riches yours to command?" With the speed of a rattler, the old man shot forth his hand and grabbed the stranger's wrist. He snatched up the money like a rabid piranha lusting for flesh. "What I give is priceless. Should cost something," he said, pushing the dollars into a leather pouch that hung on his waist belt. The young man looked down and stared at the sand. He ran the sole of his boot through the grit and stood silent. "It can't be right to want to die," he said. The Indian clicked his tongue. "You're looking for God, aren't ya, pilgrim?" With a gnarled finger the Indian pointed at a magnificent stone formation standing near the edge of the horizon. "You see stump of old tree yonder? Follow where white men go stare at rocks. When path end, face north and climb. God live there." The young man turned and stared into the desert. A tiny glitter flickered like a candle flame at the base of the monolith. He squinted and raised his hand to his forehead to shield his eyes from the glare of the burning sun. He gaped at the glimmer as though mesmerized. "What's the gleam on the mountain, chief? Is it quartz?" Empty silence. He turned slightly and looked behind him, but the Indian had vanished. The man paid for the gas, got into his truck, and drove into the desert. The trail on the ridge was clear and smooth now, like an amber-colored footpath. He bent slightly and rubbed the swollen knee. It felt spongy, and it ached like some kind of rotting tooth that needed extraction. He took a deep breath and cursed the Indian in his thoughts. Why did I listen to this blathering old fool? He tightened the bandana he'd wrapped around his knee and ambled forth into the ocean of yellow light. He passed beneath a natural stone bridge. Etched in the towering archway were petroglyphs of birds, animals, and humanoid forms of unknown origin. He walked beneath the structure and turned at a buttress that loomed before him. In the distance, a figure appeared. It sat atop a symmetrical boulder, like some kind of deity made of bronze. Rose-colored flames, ringed by a circle of rocks, danced near its feet. The fire had no smoke. It burned without struggle, as though content to feast on the virgin breezes of the mountain. What looked like a red and yellow trade blanket lay draped over the man's shoulders. The blanket shrouded his head and covered his body like a cocoon. A low buzz pierced the silence with what sounded like some kind of temple chant. The stranger limped closer, but the figure remained still. The young man inched forward. The figure held a string of coral-colored beads in its hands. It fondled the beads gently, as if they were alive. He froze, awaiting the cadaverous shape to acknowledge him. It continued to chant like some brainsick oracle lost in a trance. He braced his staff with his shoulder, then raised his hand and rubbed the coarse stubble of beard on his face. The shaman paused, threw back the blanket, and opened wide its eyes. One of them held a black, odious malignancy. The young man's eyes widened and his jaw fell agape. His staff fell to the ground and rattled the stones. "It's you. But you were. How did you? You could not have." The shaman's gaze returned to the flames. In a hollow voice, he said, "Light is information. Did you know that, Yankee? A shaman can shift his light. I let you see what you need to see, and you hear what I want you to know." He looked up and smiled. The young man stood, drunk with wonder. The Indian looked younger now, his face radiant with life, and his body lean and robust. His toothless maw now held a set of perfectly formed bone-white teeth. A sour look formed on the young man's features. "Why did you bring me here, demon? Are you going to sacrifice me to some pagan deity? You promised to show me God. You're not God. You're nothing more than a worthless medicine man." His face turned beet red, and his heart pounded in his chest. "You let me risk my life to climb up here for nothing? I got a notion to kick your sorry ass." He grabbed the stick and lunged forward. Like a swirling dust devil, the shaman shot to his feet. He spread wide the blanket and stood defiant, like a giant vampire bat. "Focus your mind, pilgrim," he cried. "It's a long way to the floor of the desert. Only fools cling to reason. I promise to reveal God, and I shall." The young man recoiled and lowered his weapon. The Indian raised his face to the sky. The fire surged, and an austere voice echoed on the mountain. "The only God you will ever know is the one you brought here with you." The young man stood aghast. The shaman's lips had not moved. The voice came from the mountain, and the desert, and the sky. He stood shaken, like a fawn pierced by a poisoned arrow. "What does it mean, old man? Are you saying that I am God?" The shaman lowered his arms and drew the blanket around him. "I've already given you enough medicine to heal you the rest of your life, pilgrim. You cannot elude God. Go now." The young man stood defiantly. "I'm not going anywhere until you explain what it means." The shaman's face contorted. You need reason? Here's one. A gaping wound opened in the Indian's throat and spread up to his head, where it burst wide to reveal the very face of horror. A wet spot appeared in the young man's trousers. He turned and ran. With every step, pain tore through his body like a hand of lightning. He stumbled, and the stick fell from his grasp. He skidded face down on the rocks. From behind, a voice roared. Why do you seek what you cannot forget? The young man lay stunned and groaning in the rubble stone. I won't die like this, he vowed. He rolled over and pulled the knife from the sheath at his waist. He struggled to his feet and raised the blade. He shifted his head left then right, awaiting the demon's attack. The shaman had vanished. Everything had disappeared, the blanket, the blueberries, and the stone gateway. Only a charred depression lay where the fire once burned. The rock where the sorcerer sat remained at the head of the fire pit. The young man crept forth until he reached the boulder. Its seat appeared as smooth as glass, like a polished gemstone worn to a pale luster through eons of ritual. On its surface lay the shaman's string of ochre-colored beads. He picked up the beads, they felt cool and reassuring in his fingers. The young man sat down on the stone and stared out at the desert for a long time. The spirit of night had awakened, and the stars gleamed in the heavens. He fondled the beads gently and watched the fireflies blink on the chaparral below. A tear formed in his eye and drained down his cheek.